This is Intro to Replacement Effects. There will be an advanced replacement effects seminar given a little bit later, but this one's the intro. So we're going to cover a lot of rules and a lot of the more two card or so interactions. So let's take a look. My pronouns are he, him. I've been judging for I've been playing for about 8 years. I've been judging for almost 6 years, and in May it'll be 6 years. And my basic passions really are soft skills and mentoring. Generally, that's where I fall in the line as far as doing presentations go. But I was asked if I could do this, and I wanted to challenge myself a little bit. So we're going to do a presentation on hard skills, on replacement effects. So let's start off with what's a replacement effect, and let's see some wrong answers only. I'm kind of curious. Maybe a player's answer or something that you've seen before. Player's perspective of a replacement effect, Elaine. Ding, that's correct. If you can't actually see it, try rejoining the presentation. Oftentimes that clears it up. Continuous effects like giant growth. Okay, so we've got some great answers here. I just wanted to give a little bit of fun to begin, but yeah, players oftentimes replacement effects. So what is it in game terms? And we're going to read the rule here just so that we all have it firmly in our minds. But essentially, it's some continuous effects are replacement effects, like prevention effects, which is another rule, and we'll talk about them a little bit. Replacement effects apply continuously as events happen. They aren't locked in ahead of time. Such events watch for a particular event that would happen and completely or partially replace that event with a different event. They act like shields around whatever they are affecting. Essentially, a replacement effect is an alternative game rule. If you expect something to happen, we're going to switch things up and do something different. We're going to delve a little deeper into how this works in a moment here. But if we just think of them as game's editors, able to rewrite the script of what is happening in the game, we're reasonably close to how they behave. Um, so when I say they don't use the stack here, the first one, these are some basics. That means there's no priority check. They can happen at any time, even during the casting of a spell. The idea behind them is that they literally change the rules of the game. If I could pick one area of the CR that is the most confusing for me, I'd consider nominating replacement effects because of their far-reaching changes that they can make. They do fall outside the natural order of the game in some ways. For an effect to work, the rule must exist before it's needed. For instance, you can't flash in a card that has a replacement effect to send all creatures that die to exile after creatures died and expected to go to exile. The third item here prevents infinite loops per effect. Seems like a pretty important rule, and it is. There are many different effects that would loop infinitely, breaking the game if you allow them to. Most effects are always turned on or looking for an event to happen. But there's an exception to this, and that is the self-replacement effect. We will talk about that as a separate item in a little bit. And replacement effects change how a permanent can be turned face up. So when you megamorph would be an example of that. So how do we identify these things in the wild? How do we come across them and know that we're looking at a replacement effect? And these are a couple of things that we're looking for. When we see these words, instead, we know it, and that occurs generally at the end of a sentence, although it can occur in the middle. Skip is somewhere in the middle generally of an effect. So if you see the word skip, and as we know, the last two there, they often start on the text of a line. So permanent name enters the battlefield, or as is permanent's turned face up. We want to remember that triggers are not a replacement effect. So if we see when, whenever, at, we're not looking at a trigger. We're not looking at a replacement effect as a rule. There's a card called Ugin's Nexus, and it's neat because it has two different replacement effect words in it that are signpost words. So if we look, if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead, or if Ugin's Nexus would be put in a graveyard from a battle, instead exile it and take an extra turn after this one. Cool. Thank you. Before we leave here, I just want to bask for a moment in my signpost. I made it all myself, including the individual arrows, and I think it's kind of cool looking. So replacement effects also can change card draw. And there's a couple of important points that we want to. That is a manually added reflection. Yes, Jeffrey. So we want to look at card draw because replacement effects can change how we draw cards in the game. There are three really important things here to remember. If there are no cards in the library, the action is replacing the card draw step anyway. So it happens without a detrimental effect, i.e., you don't draw a card from an empty library and lose the game. The replacement effect will take care of that and change the rules of the game there. If you're drawing 3 cards and the replacement effect happens to affect the second card drawn for whatever reason, it's the second card, then you do the full replacement effect before going to the third card. And then if the effect would have a player draw a card and perform an action on the drawn card only and replace the drawing of the card, then nothing will happen with the second part. Why? Well, because we never drew the card to begin with in terms of the replacement effect. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at a few different, very straightforward examples of cards. I wanted to pull them up one at a time. We are going to do some interactions, but let's just look at these individually and see what the replacement effect is and talk about it for a moment. I did try and pull mostly from Kaldheim, but as we'll find out in a moment, that's not exactly easy to do. But here we have a Calamity Bearer, and if a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead to that permanent, double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Giant source. So not only are there 10 cards in Kaldheim with instead in the rules text, but many of them deal with either damage, this being combat set heavy, at least according to my son, who's an expert in all things magic, or exile effects. So just think, if there are only 10 cards in Kaldheim, how many are there in all of Magic's history? They're probably not quite as common as triggers, but they are extremely common, especially instead effects. Skip is most often used to reference a step, phase, or turn-based action. In this case, the entire draw step is being replaced with nothing. Skip your draw step. Well, if the draw step doesn't happen, then you don't get to do anything that is associated with the draw step. So the player would go from untap to upkeep, where we deal with triggers related to this card, to pre-combat main phase. Just draw disappears. If 2 different effects cause someone to skip the same thing, for instance, the post-combat main phase, then it will happen to each occurrence listed. So basically, if you have 2 effects that tell you to skip your post-combat main phase, it's going to do it twice. So it'll do it 2 turns in a row. Clone is, I made a little joke. See, clone and clone. Clone offers the option for a player to have it enter the battlefield as a copy of something else. So what we're doing is we're replacing the effect of the object entering the battlefield by allowing it to be different. If a player casting Clone is doing so in a game with no other creatures, or if they choose it because it does have a May ability, the Clone can enter as a 0/0, and in that case, it would just go to the graveyard unless there's something else happening. We're going to get to our cellos. He's a friend. He's going to show up somewhere in here. Arctic Treeline is a great example. Enter the battlefield replacements are cellos Enter the battlefield replacements are very common in the game. And they're no more common than they are for lands that are non-basics. It's important to remember here that there's no in-between point with a land. This card is on the stack or it's on the battlefield. Well, in fact, it doesn't get to be on the stack. But with enter the battlefield effects, it's either on the stack or on the battlefield. When it does enter the battlefield, it exists from the beginning moments as described. So it enters as tapped. Also, +1/+1 counters or clone effects are also other effects like this. Let's see. Hooded Hydra, our chunky friend here, is a great example of two ways replacement effects bring out +1/+1 counters. It has the first one that works on resolution when it's cast from hand, and then the second works if it's just turned face up. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper into some of the different types of replacement effects and talk about them some, and then we're going to get to interactions and examples. Yeah, okay. I'll +1 the Archellos. I mean, I think that's great. So regeneration is a replacement effect. It's a destruction replacement effect. So when we say destruction events, we explicitly do not mean sacrifice or exile or the legend rule or death from 0 toughness or planeswalker with 0 loyalty. All these occurrences do not normally result in the destruction actually of a permanent. And we're not talking just about creatures. If you place a regeneration shield on a land or an artifact, it can protect it and will protect it from a destruction event, like Abrupt Decay or Decimate. If the effect is used, then damage is removed and the item gets tapped. If it's in combat, it's removed from combat. It actually replaces the destruction event, so triggers that look for that event won't. Regeneration also only works if it is placed on the permanent prior to it being destroyed. You can't regenerate something once it hits the graveyard. I'm sad to say it's just it doesn't work that way. Here's a fun fact: permanents can have multiple regeneration effects applied to them. They stack on each other like layers of clothing. Destroy effect causes only the outer layer to be removed. So think of it as multiple shields, or maybe if you look at it from Star Trek, a shield percentage. Effects that say permanents can't be regenerated don't prevent the permanent from having a regeneration effect. Rather, just ignores and applies any applied regeneration effect. Will we stop playing with legendary rule? Okay. I'm so glad that rule is gone. So, if an ability would be triggered due to damage being dealt, then does that ability still trigger? Does anybody know? Scott says yes. Dobie, I'll repeat the question for you. If an ability would be triggered due to damage being dealt, then does the ability still trigger if there's a regeneration effect in place? Yeah. Okay, everybody agrees yes, and that's the case. So here's another question. What happens to a 2/2 bear token with regeneration turned on if it is hit with something that changes its power and toughness to say -2/-2, a dead weight effect? Right. I mean, this is basic stuff, but I want to make sure we're covering it. The bear does die, sad face, and Paul Baronet probably hunts me down for allowing it to happen, which is terrible. I should never let a 2/2 bear die in my presentation. New cards don't say regenerate. Elaine, do you want to? Oh, they don't. Okay. Wow, I do feel old now. Oh, look, pretty little shield. Now, redirection effects are another type of replacement effect. the most important thing to remember about them is that they aren't prevention effects, although they sound kind of like them. And also, if the target is gone, the redirection can't happen. And Vassal's Duty is a great example of a redirection effect. The next time one damage would be dealt to the target legendary creature you control this turn, it's dealt to you instead. So it's changing where the damage goes. Self-replacement effects are neat, and we're gonna talk about them for a minute here. They're an effect that happens during the resolution of a spell, and mostly you'll see them as a part of an ability word, such as Hellbent or Morbid, Landfall, and Metalcraft. In this case, we have a nice example on Brimstone Valley, where if Morbid is met, Brimstone Valley deals 5 damage instead if a creature died this turn instead of 3 damage. So a self-replacement effect is changing how this card works, how it resolves. We're going to talk a little bit about the order of replacement effects, but if there are multiple replacement effects and one of them is a self-replacement, does anybody know which happens first? Which one we worry about first? Anyone disagree? Cool. Yes, we do take care of ourselves first. Self-replacement does happen first, and that's good. It helps to have an order to these things. So we're going to talk about prevention effects now. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at the rule for prevention effects. Some continuous effects are prevention effects, like replacement effects. Prevention effects apply continuously as events happen. They aren't locked in ahead of time. Such effects watch for a damage event that would happen and completely or partially prevent that damage that would be dealt. They act like shields around whatever they're affecting. Does anybody notice anything interesting about prevention effects, about the rule and how it's written? It struck me as really odd when I started reading it. It's literally identical. It almost is, isn't it? In fact, it even uses an identical closing sentence. They act like shields around whatever they're affecting, also appears for replacement effects on 614.1. Isn't that weird? I had a philosophical discussion with Isaac last night about this in regards to one of the questions that we'll have later on. And he asked me, what's really the difference? And I had a hard time coming up with it. And I think it's simply because prevention effects are so similar that it's hard to distinguish them exactly, but they are slightly different. In fact, the number one thing that is different about them is prevention effects really deal with damage. So let's see here. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about the details of prevention effects. Just as with replacement effects, a prevention effect, it has to exist prior to the damage event happening. That makes sense, right? If we've learned anything about Magic, players can't time travel. We won't say anything about Teferi, but players can't do it yet. Now, when damage is prevented, it never happens. Instead, a modified event may happen that can lead to triggers, but the important thing to remember is that the damage prevented doesn't actually happen in case anything in the game is looking for that. Toby, we're not talking about them wearing, clothes from the 60s. When the damage is prevented, it never happens. Did I read that already? Yeah, I did. So when damage effects are prevented, sometimes they reference a specific amount. Prevent the next 2 damage this creature would take until end of turn. Think of each point of damage as its own mini shield. So in this case, it could be dealt 3 damage and only take 1 damage. Let's see. Be dealt 2 damage and prevent 2 damage, or be dealt 1 damage and still be able to prevent 1 more damage later in the turn. If you have a 2/2 bear that has a prevention effect for damage, oh, poor bear. We're going back to bears again. For damage for the turn, and a source would deal 1 damage that can't be prevented, then the damage goes through. So in doing so, since the damage can't be prevented to the 2/2 bear, there is still a prevention effect in place. The prevention effect doesn't go away if the damage cannot be prevented. Future damage events that would be prevented, unless they are similarly charged, future damage events that in turn will be prevented unless they are similarly charged with can't be prevented. So if we look at this list, we see here the order of prevention and replacement effects and how they happen in game and how we sort things out. Edict of Shavka. Very well. And as we noted before, self-replacement effects, if there's going to be a self-replacement effect, that happens first. We have to let those go before anything else. If we're going to modify the control of an object entering the battlefield, that goes next in order. And I have an example of that here. Because I thought it was neat, so I looked it up. Nope, that's the prevention effect. Hold on. Oh, that's it. Gather specimens. Yep, gather specimens. That's it. If a creature would come into play under an opponent's control this turn, it comes into play under your control instead. So we would have the self-replacement effect, then any copy effects that happen as they enter the battlefield, clones and spark doubles, and then all other effects. Now, we know that what happens with replacement effects is the person that they're affecting or the object that they're affecting, the controller determines which order they happen in. Oh, Crafty Cut Purse, thank you. If for some reason multiple prevention effects are affecting multiple players simultaneously, we do it in nap order, but it's not like other things where triggers where we do that as a default. So hey, let's have some fun. What do we think? So Amy here controls a Viridian Revel. Nate is enchanted by the wheel. Yeah. If Nate's smuggler copter, an artifact, is destroyed during combat, what happens and why? Elaine says no card draw. So the wheel's effects change where the whirly bird goes when it dies. Revel will not trigger. That's sad. What if a player controls 2 permanents on the battlefield and they each state? If a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. They attack with a 2/2 goblin unblocked. How much damage is dealt? Why is that much damage dealt? Seeing a lot of 8s. Anybody disagree? right? Jeffrey's even proven his math. He's showing it to us. That's good. So yeah, 8 damage happens. So the neat thing about replacement effects is you can have multiples that are going to try and affect the same instance, the same happening in the game, but you don't actually stack them. You do them one at a time, and then at the end of the second one, you see if you is at the end of the first one, you see if there's another one that still applies. In this case, they're going to both apply. So it's going to be the 2 gets doubled to 4. And then because there's another replacement effect that's out there that's still allowing you to double effects, we're going to go to 8. Who wants to go to 16? Oh, yeah. Ooh, that is 16. No, 4 times 4. Yeah, 16. Okay. Yeah, we were talking earlier about how somebody could, multiply, add 2 plus 2 and get 5, I think, or maybe that was something I was listening to elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, you can do the math and make things weird. So let's go to the next one. Player Aaron plays Mediate during their post-combat made phase. And Mediate says, draw 4 cards. You skip your next turn. After it finishes resolving and while still in their post-combat main phase, they play a second one. Because they like to live a little dangerously, I think. What happens? I always love the enthusiasm of blue players. I really, really do. Okay, so what happens is what everybody believes happens in the game is that yes, Aaron is going to get to draw 8 cards, which for a blue player sounds really good. And then Aaron's also going to skip their next 2 turns. Each effect will be dealt with individually as they happen, and then when it comes to the next turn, they'll have to lose their turn again. Seems kind of bad, but I think Aaron likes to live dangerously and probably figures that they'd find their answers in 8 cards. I mean, if you can't find your answers in 8 cards, are you even playing Magic? Or at least are you even playing blue? Let's look at another one. Annie has Underrealm Lich and Abundance in play. Both have effects that want to replace the event for drawing a card. So what happens here? So Dennis has the player chooses one. Zach is thinking about timestamps. Several people are typing, so at least let another couple more come in. Yes, Tony, they're both controlled by the same player. Dennis has a really in-depth answer there, and we're going to go with Dennis's answer here and talk about it for a second, okay? So what happens here is you have 2 different replacement effects that want to replace the draw step with Underrealm Lich. It says if you would draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put one in your hand and the rest in the graveyard. Abundance, the enchantment, says if you would draw a card, you may instead choose land or non-land, and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of your chosen kind. Put that card in your hand, and put all the other cards revealed that way into the bottom of your library in any order. So we have two different effects that are trying to replace the same event. In this case, it's absolutely correct. You choose one. So let's choose abundance. So we're going to go through the steps of abundance. And then that replacement effect for Lich is still sitting there. But unfortunately, Lich effect does nothing because we've already passed the draw step. We've already replaced it, and we replaced it with abundance. The reverse would happen if you did it with Underground Lich instead of abundance, if you chose that. Okay? All good? Let's try another one. Everybody's favorite criminal here, Nexus of Fate. Annabelle plays Nexus of Fate. After a moment's of thought, Nadine says, syncopate. This leaves us with a situation there where there are two effects doing something similar. Is there a clear winner here? Why? Shuffle. Got self-replacement. So Jeffrey's thinking syncopate. Eldon's thinking Nexus, maybe. Elaine saying self-replacement from sync. Okay. I think we've got pretty much a consensus here. And it is clear that's what happens. Syncopate's effect is a self-replacement effect. So counter target spell unless its controller plays X. Got it. So we're just going to assume that Annabelle doesn't have X to pay. If that spell is countered this way, exile instead. So we have something that's happening that's changing how syncopate would work. We're not just countering it, we're exiling it when it gets taken care of. So we exile it instead of putting it into the owner's graveyard. So we do that, and then by the time we get to what Nexus Fate can do, it's no longer there. Right? So Nexus loses in this case. Let's look at another one. If Aretha controls Keranos and has 6 devotion to red and blue, and then casts Spark Double, can they have Spark Double enter as a copy of Keranos? And Toby, that is what matters. It did try. All right, Zach and Dennis are on the no page. Zach saying because it's not in play as a Spark Double, and Spark Double can only copy creatures' planeswalkers. Right. Stephen likes my question. Thank you, Stephen. Right. So Jeffrey, in that case, what happens? You're right. Okay, so at the time that Spark Double goes on the stack, it's got to make that choice. And unfortunately, Keranos is not legal at that point in time to be a choice. Keranos at that point in time is still an enchantment. Neat, huh? All right. Got a couple more here. And we're going to go back to Nexus of Fate because we love Nexus of Fate. Arnold controls a Leyline of the Void, and they mill Nan's Nexus of Fate. How is this resolved? Does anybody know? So again, Arnold controls the ley line of the void, and they mill Nan's Nexus of Fate. How is it resolved? And we almost have Haiku in there. That's great. In this case, Arnold chooses one, and then the other event doesn't happen. Okay. Arnold controls the. Wait, what? Did I get it wrong? Am I confusing? I'm sorry. Arnold is the controller of ley line. No, I'm good. Okay. So Arnold chooses. I'm going to, as I work through these, go back and just take a look at something as I'm doing this. But we're going to go to the next one. Yes, Toby. No, wait. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to skip this question. We're going to come back. And I'll double check it between them. Okay? Yes, bye-bye Nexus. No more Nexus. Okay, so in this case, I control it because I like this card. I control Elgith, Crossroads Augur, and then I copy it with Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. If I cast Omen Speaker to Scry 2, do I get to draw 4 cards? Wow, that's a lot of people voting for 2 really fast. Are you guys sure? Is everybody sure? Right. Yep. Not 2 squared. Yeah, let's check that math, right? Right, Steven? Okay, so in this case, you do only get to draw 2 cards. Elgith's ability is not triggered. That adds drawing to scrying. It's just a regular replacement effect. And one of these effects has been applied. Once one of them has been applied, the scry's been replaced, just like before, where we replaced the other event a few slides ago. This second event is no longer applicable. It's not something that can happen. All right, let's take a look at. See, I told you the turtle would be here. Nan controls Archielos. Yes, Lagoon Mystic, which is currently untapped. Adam plays Charcoal Diamond. Does the diamond enter tapped or untapped? Player's choice depends. Probably untapped. So Nan plays the Charcoal Diamond. It's her choice, just as you all have latched onto. We have 2 replacement effects that are affecting the Charcoal Diamond, how it enters the battlefield. With the Archellos, it wants to enter untapped, and the Diamond wants it to enter tapped. And since Nan controls the Diamond, they get to choose which of the replacement effects happen first. And just because we have a turtle on the screen, we may as well talk about turtles. Turtle. All right, well, let me see. Can I go back a couple slides? Because I do want to make sure I've got this right for everybody. Yep, I can. This one here, this one here. Let's go back through this again just to make sure, okay? Because it's unfair to leave you all with bad information. I want to make sure I've got it right. So this example is Arnold controls the ley line of the void and they mill Nan's Nexus of Fate. How is it resolved, right? So in this case, the opponent will get to choose whether to shuffle it into their library or exile it. They get to make this choice no matter whose turn it is. Yep. Yep. Okay. So we're all on the same page here. All right. I'm sorry about the confusion with that one before. So let's advance this few slides, get back to where we were. We did this. All right. Let's up the difficulty with one more question before we go to our quizzes and some other stuff. How does an interaction work when Wasteland Strangler enters the battlefield and tries to move a card an opponent has an exile to the graveyard? Toby, I accept that. You're absolutely correct. That art is clearly superior. For those that can't see this and they're listening to the presentation instead of seeing what's happening in chat later on, Toby detailed the rest in peace with the doggo art, and the puppy is very clearly resting very quietly and nicely and having a good nap and dreaming about chasing cats. So does a creature get the -3/-3 in this? Elaine says she thinks it works. Yeah, we got another one that's agreeing. Card won't get put in the graveyard, so the creature doesn't get the. So we have Dennis disagreeing. Good. No clue. Okay, I'm going to tell you that this was probably one of the hardest questions I came across. And I wanted to put it in there because I think it still talks to all the different things that we've been talking about up to this point. So the short version is yes, you get to have your cake and you can eat it too in this case. The card in exile will attempt to be moved. Wasteland Strangler doesn't care that the item never makes it to the graveyard. Only that a valid attempt is made. So as an aside, for the purposes of rules that do care about it, the item becomes a new object in exile, but you also get to give a creature -3/-3. Isn't that cool? All right, now I'm going to post this information up on the screen here, and I think it's going to give you everything that you need, and then we're going to try and do one of these Menti quizzes. So if you go to menti.com, hold on, let me make sure I've got it loaded. If you go to menti.com and you type in that code, we're going to get a few people to join. And I'm not going to be able to see chat for a few minutes because I only have so many screens in front of me. I'm going to wait until I get one or two more people, and then we're going to go ahead and start. We'll give it another moment. There we go. So I'm going to read everything as we go just so that people get a chance to hear it in case they're not actually looking at it or logged in. I probably should try and reshare that screen, but I don't want to break my presentation at the same time. So I think we're going to stick with this. Ready to go? Here we go. First question. If Adam casts Planar Cleansing, destroy all non-land permanents while controlling Leyline of the Void, what happens to their opponent's creatures? Everything to graveyard, everything but Leyline to the graveyard, everything is exiled. Those are the three choices. As I'm looking at this, I'm wondering if I've got this question right. Because I think we were talking about it last night. Everything is exiled. There we go. Next question. Next question is dredge a replacement effect? And on the card demonstrated, it has, if you would draw a card, instead you may put exactly one card from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Otherwise, draw a card. There is no show results option here. I'm sorry.
Charles, can you quickly check chat for a moment?
I can try and do that. Let's see. Discord. Yes. What am I looking at?
Just wondering about the previous Leyline question.
So if Leyline of Void is in your opening hand, you maybe if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. And the question is whether or not Leyline goes to the graveyard, right? Or goes to exile, right? Yeah. We were talking about that. Yes. I was talking about it with Isaac last night. He caught me on it too, and I forgot to correct the question beforehand. You're right. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, the cards go into graveyard and the Leyline does not. No, Toby, rules didn't change while you weren't looking. I fell asleep at the switch last night. I'm going to flip back to the questions now. I know that the rest of the questions are good. Question 3. When a creature is regenerated, the following happens. Choose the best answer. So answers are removed from combat and tapped. Creature goes to the graveyard and is returned to the battlefield. Or damage is removed from combat and then tapped. Okay, so we've got a case that it's regenerated. There are 3 things that happen or can happen. Damage is removed from the creature, or if it's not a creature and there's damage marked on it somehow, then damage is removed. It is removed from combat if it's in combat, and it is tapped at the time that is regenerated. It does not ever go to the graveyard and then is returned to the battlefield. And nobody picked that one, which is great. Some players think that that's what happens. Next question. Is Isaac King a great conference organizer? This is a really tough one. There are going to be 4 answers. The answers are yes, 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 and see results. Everyone's voted. 2 people picked see results. You cowards. I wonder if Isaac was in the room. Maybe he picked see results again. So to review briefly, I just want to go over things again before. Yeah, I think he would too. Before we leave, I want to just review quickly. Replacement effects, they change the rules of the game. We identify them generally by instead, skip, or the different enter the battlefield type of effects. Regeneration, it removes damage, it taps the permanent, and it removes it from combat. Don't forget that regeneration can also protect lands and artifacts. In the case of self-replacement, it's an artifact that changes the way a spell resolves. Redirection, nothing happens there if the card is gone or if the target is gone. And then prevention effects, and they're almost always related, or they are related to damage, but I think they could be designed to do something else, which is why I'm very careful about saying that. But they're not replacement effects. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to take them afterwards if we really don't have time now, because I know that we're coming close to the end of my time limit. There should also be a feedback form floating around in the announcements channel, and I'm sure that somebody can come grab that or bring it in a moment. If you need to find me, I'm here on Discord. You can find me on Facebook. I really, really appreciate feedback. There he is. Thank you, Isaac. I really appreciate the feedback. I know I had 1 or 2 spots in here with this presentation. It's really the first time I've done hard rules as a presentation. And I welcome the challenge, but I also know that there are places I can make it a little bit better. I do like to list where I get some of my information so that you all can go in and benefit from it and find more cool replacement effects. So I checked JudgeCast, which is currently on some form of a hiatus, but the last replacement effects episode they did was 173. I used Yoggatog, which is one of the best ways to look up rules online, I think, personally. And I pulled a lot of my graphics from Scryfall because, hey, if you're not using Scryfall for your gatherer stuff, then you might be doing it wrong. No judgment here. I hope everybody had a good time, and I'm out.